The security camera catches it all. A young man sprints through Varna airport, his face twisted in pure terror. He abandons his phone, his wallet, and luggage as he races towards the exit. Outside, he charges at a 12-foot fence topped with razor wire. Blood sprays as the metal slices his hands, but he doesn't slow down. He vaults over it and then disappears into the field of sunflower. That man was Lars Mittank. So what could make a normal, stable, 28-year-old German tourist suddenly run like his life depended on it? On June 30th, 2014, Lars Mittank and 4 friends left their hometown of Itzehoe, Germany, heading for Bulgaria's Black Sea coast. And at 28, Lars was the definition of reliable. He was a power plant worker who never missed any shifts. He called his grandmother every Sunday and had been saving for months just to go on this getaway. Finally escaping the factory noise, Lars said, tapping on the dashboard of his friend Thomas's Volkswagen with his calloused fingers. He'd been counting down the days, stashing away all these euros from each paycheck for this escape from his routine. His mother, Sandra, hugged him goodbye on their small little porch outside right before he left. And she said be careful, as she was already planning his favorite schnitzel dinner for his return. The kitchen still smelled of vanilla cookies that she'd baked for his trip. And Lars promised to call right away and waved as Thomas's old Volkswagen pulled away. And every single person that knew Lars described him as that exact same way. Reliable, practical, and level-headed. He never missed work. He called his grandmother every Sunday without fail. He kept a childhood scrapbook of sailboat sketches under his bed. And he did this because he dreamed of one day sailing to the Baltic Sea. And there was a small scar on his left forearm from a bike crash when he was 12 years old. And at the time, he had gone over the handlebars, flying over them, but yet he still managed to laugh as blood trickled down his elbow. Nothing, absolutely nothing about him suggested someone who would vanish without explanation. Okay, so the first days at Golden Sands Resort, which is where they left, is where everything they hoped for began. Photos show Lars laughing on beaches, raising beers in a toast, and dancing in clubs as the Black Sea breeze carried the scent of salt through open windows. And in one picture, he's actually building a sandcastle on the beach. Then in another, he's raising a glass for a toast, his eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine happiness. Remember that. It was genuine happiness. He had no place to go or escape to. He was in his escape destination. And one night he texted his mom, Sandra, and he said, "This is paradise." And you know, the photo showed him smiling, sunset painting the water gold behind him, the endless horizon just stretched out either way, and the skies streaked with the oranges and pinks that reflected off of the calm water. But on July 6th, their final night in Bulgaria, paradise shattered. Alright, so try to take this in and imagine it with me, okay? The group was watching a soccer match, or football match, depending on where you live, between Werder Bremen and Bayern Munich in a packed sports bar in Bulgaria. Okay, try to imagine this. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Lars was cheering loudly for Bremen, and he caught the attention of 4 burly men in dark jackets that were supporting Bayern. I'm sure in Europe, or if you've lived there, you've seen the videos on how, explosive the men and women can get about their football teams. And security cameras later showed those men kind of whispering, pointing at Lars. One man, a scar visible across his cheek, nodded to the others. Their heavy steps fell in rhythm as they moved through the crowded bar, their eyes, though, never leaving Lars. And Thomas noticed first. He said, "Those guys keep staring at you. Let's get out of here." And at that moment, that's when, Lars kind of glances over because he was unaware of the 4 men that were watching him. And the temperature in the room seemed to drop as their eyes just locked on each other. Something unspoken passed between them, a challenge or a threat. And Lars felt his smile that he had fade, and it was replaced by an unfamiliar sense of dread. So the friends decided to be smart, and they left quickly. But security footage revealed that the men followed them into the night, their heavy steps echoing through the empty streets. The shadows stretched long and dark under the streetlights. And then, around 1 a.m., the group stopped at McDonald's, and the restaurant's familiar neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a red glow right on the pavement. Lars, though, stayed outside to grab a smoke. "I'll wait here," he said, his hands kind of trembling as he struggled with his lighter, and the flame flickered 3 times before catching, and he told them to go ahead. 10 minutes later, Thomas returned to find Lars all of a sudden gone. His cigarette lay there, crushed on the ground, still smoldering. So right then, panic really set in. The friends, searched the hotel, the beach, all these nearby streets. Lars's phone went straight to voicemail, which nobody likes to hear. Each unanswered call ratcheted up their own fear as the night grew more frightening with each passing moment. And then at 3 a.m., just as they were about to call the police, Lars staggered back into the hotel. His shirt was torn from the shoulder, mud caked all over his boots, and blood trickled down from his left ear, staining his collar with a dark red that gave off this sharp metallic smell. "What happened?" Thomas demanded, grabbing Lars's shoulders. In between these ragged breaths, Lars explained that 4 men had attacked him in an alley, and he said, "They said I have seen too much." He kind of stammered. His eyes were darting nervously around the lobby. "They hit me hard." And his story, didn't add up. Hours had passed with no screams in this quiet night. And what exactly had Lars seen too much of? Well, when pressed for details, Lars became vague. His descriptions were contradictory and confusing. I mean, these are his buddies. They're just trying to understand and help on what's going on with him. The next morning, they decided to take Lars to Dr. Kosta Kostov. This small examination room felt claustrophobic with its white walls and the persistent buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. The doctor had confirmed a ruptured eardrum and a possible jaw injury. Cold metal instruments clicked against his teeth as Dr. Kostov examined Lars, who winced at each touch.
"He kept looking over his shoulder during the examination,"
Dr. Kostov later recounted to the police.
"like he was expecting someone to walk in any moment. I mean, I've treated many tourists with injuries, but I've never seen someone so frightened in a doctor's office."
Excuse the accent. So Dr. Kostov prescribed an antibiotic called Cefprozil and advised Lars not to fly for a few days until his ear, was healed. And the prescription paper crinkled as Lars folded it tightly and shoved it deep into his pocket. And despite his friends' protests, and there were a lot of protests about this, Lars insisted that they return to Germany as planned. "I'll stay in a hotel near the airport, recover, then fly home," he said, forcing a smile that, never really reached his eyes. His hands left sweaty prints on Thomas's shoulders as he gripped them tightly. "No sense in all of us missing work," he said. So in the end, his friends, reluctantly agreed, not realizing that they were witnessing the beginning of a nightmare that they could not stop. So as they, hugged goodbye at the bus station, Thomas felt Lars trembling. And when asked if he was cold, Lars just, shook his head, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd behind them. "Well, call us when you get home," Thomas said, clinging onto the bus about to enter. And through the window, he watched Lars, standing alone on the curb, looking suddenly small and vulnerable in the morning sun. And that night, Lars decided to check into Hotel Color near Varna Airport. And the lobby was shabby, as they say, with faded wallpaper and buzzing fluorescent lights. And those lights kind of casted a sickly yellow glow over everything. But what happened over the next 24 hours would baffle investigators and the public for years. Okay, so security cameras captured Lars pacing hallways at midnight, his footsteps making the old floorboards creak. And he peered around corners, constantly checking if anybody was behind him, as if expecting to see someone just appear. The footage also showed him ducking into elevators when other guests would appear, his movements growing more frantic with each passing hour. So at one point, he left the hotel for about an hour, and when he returned, his shoes were muddy, fresh scratches marked on his arms like claw marks, and his clothes were damp with sweat. He smelled of earth and fear, the desk clerk later recalled, and there was this wild look in his eyes that hadn't been there earlier. And at 1 a.m., Lars called his mother in Germany, his voice tight with fear over the crackling connection. Mom, cancel my credit cards right now, he said urgently. They might be tracking me through them. And before Sandra could, even ask any questions, the call dropped. So she stood in her kitchen, heart racing, the ticking clock on the wall seeming unnaturally loud in the silence as she tried his number again and again. And then thankfully, 2 hours later, Lars called again. This time his voice, though, was barely audible, a hoarse whisper filled with raw terror. They're after me, Mom. They're going to kill me.
Lars, who's after you?
Sandra pleaded, but the line then went dead. So she stood in the dark kitchen, tears streaming down her face at this point, utterly helpless to reach her son who was hundreds of miles away. And then his final call came at 4 a.m., and Lars was frantic about his ear medication. The pills! They're poisoned! They're using them to track me! He shouted before hanging up abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening, and that no mother or father should ever hear. Later, investigations revealed Lars had never even filled the prescription that Dr. Kostov gave him. The small piece of paper was found, still crumpled and unused, in his abandoned backpack. And then by morning, Lars took a taxi to Varna airport. He was about to leave and go home to Germany. The driver, Ivan, later reported that his passenger seemed deeply disturbed, constantly checking the rearview mirror and asking if they were being followed by anybody. Are they behind us? Lars kept asking, his knuckles white as he gripped the seat in front of him. His breathing was quick and shallow in this confined space. And when they arrived to the airport, Lars bolted out from the taxi before it had fully even stopped, leaving the door just swinging open. And from there, he sprinted toward the terminal entrance. And inside the busy terminal, Lars spotted Dr. Kostov, who happened to be there for another patient. The doctor suggested a quick checkup before Lars went and flew. And what happened next was captured in chilling detail by security cameras, which, yes, I am going to show you. I know I rarely show videos on this, and I hope it doesn't get copyrighted. I really hope it doesn't, but I am going to show that to you. But while in the doctor's office, a construction worker in a reflective vest walked past the door, and the man's heavy boots made a distinct sound on the tile floor. Lars suddenly froze, his body tensing like a cornered animal. All color then drained from his face. It's them, he whispered, his eyes fixed on the doorway where the worker had just passed. And without warning, Lars then bolted from the office, leaving behind his backpack, his wallet, his passport, and phone scattered across the floor. Paper fluttered in his wake as Dr. Kostov called after him, confused by this sudden reaction. And that's when security footage shows him sprinting throughout the terminal, his face contorted with fear as he shouted, "I don't want to die here! I have to get out of here!" So travelers jumped out of his way as he ran. His voice was echoing through the high ceilings. And from there, he ran straight to the airport parking lot, where he made a desperate leap for the perimeter fence. Despite its 12-foot height and razor wire on top, Lars scrambled over it with the strength and pure adrenaline. Blood from his cut hands stained the metal, and his sneakers caught briefly in the wire. But then, He vanished into the vast sunflower fields beyond there, the golden blooms swallowing him whole. Search teams descended immediately. Police dogs tracked his scent to a nearby village before losing it. Helicopters scanned all the fields and forests around. Missing person posters covered Bulgaria and Germany. But there was nothing. No body, no clothing, no further sightings. Lars Mittank had vanished completely. And the 4 men from the bar were never identified despite extensive review of that security footage. And Lars's hotel room revealed nothing unusual except a note with random numbers that meant nothing to investigators. His clothes were neatly folded in his suitcase. His toothbrush was still damp in the bathroom. Everything suggested that he did plan to return home. Some medical experts, they offered theories. Perhaps Lars had suffered a concussion during the fight and this triggered a psychotic break. And then perhaps the ear medication, though he never took it, had been mentioned with warnings that may have frightened him. Police discovered that cefprozol can cause paranoia and hallucinations in rare cases, but like I said, he didn't take it. And Sandra Mittank, his mother, refused to give up. She appeared on television across Europe, her eyes hollow with grief, and she said someone must have seen something. She pleaded, "My son didn't just disappear." And she created a Facebook page that gained thousands of followers. Reported sightings poured in from Brazil, Turkey, even Australia, and each one of them led nowhere. Each was just more false hope, more crushing than the last. And today, over a decade later, Lars's wallet, passport, and backpack remain in police evidence. His phone never received another call. His bank account never saw another transaction. His social media account stood frozen in time, like digital monuments to a life that was suddenly interrupted. Sandra still keeps his room at home exactly how he left it. The sailboat sketches on the wall, gathering dust. His childhood books lined up neatly on the shelf. Sometimes she sits there, trying to piece together what could have happened to her son, wondering if there was something that she missed in those last frantic phone calls, some clue that might have saved him. And the sunflower fields near Varna airport have been harvested and replanted many times since July 8th, 2014. New tourists arrive daily, completely unaware that they're walking into the same ground where one of Europe's strangest disappearances occurred. But the most chilling aspect isn't the theories or the footage or even the desperate escape. It's the not knowing. What did Lars see that made him run? Was someone really after him? Did he escape whatever he feared? Or did it catch him in those sunflower fields? The cameras captured him going over that fence, blood staining the razor wire, sneakers catching for just a moment before he dropped to the other side of the ground and then ran into the field of gold. And then nothing. And believe it or not, Lars was never seen again, as the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Somewhere in those fields, or perhaps beyond, Lars Mittank is still running, leaving behind nothing but questions that may never be answered. Or, who knows, maybe he's alive and actually watching this story right now. And maybe as he's hearing this story, it lets him know that it's time to finally go home. I, for one, certainly hope that he is still out there, somewhere. But the question is now, what do you think? This is a crazy one, Midnight Mafia. I would love to see your comments in the comment section about what you think actually happened. If you ran away or if something terrible might have happened. And if you still want to continue watching a crazy story that makes absolutely no sense at all, but that will confuse you and maybe bring you more to life, check out this one right here. I got you guys. That's all I got for you right now, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.